Hello, Professor. I'd like to start out by thanking my team and saying how much I appreciate their patience with having me. They've been excellent to work with this whole time at National University, and I appreciate everything that they've done. They've been a great team to work with. I'd like to thank Alex and Haley and Greg. Really appreciate working with them. It's been a lot of fun. Learned a lot with them, and it's been great. I'm going to cover a couple of sections, so to hopefully fill in some of the gaps. So we're going to cover the assessment approach first. So a couple of things we did was we used open source intelligence to do some early recon on what potential vulnerabilities they might already have exposed publicly, or has been exposed publicly with software that they are using. And of course, they're using MySQL 5.5, MySQL, MySQL, however you want to pronounce that. So that has some vulnerabilities in it that we found on ExploitDB. And then on the OpenDental website itself, on the trial page, it shows you how to go through the installation. They make their recommendations on what to use for passwords and things like that. So we loaded it locally on a virtual machine. We could have used VMware. It didn't really matter. We chose VirtualBox because it's free and easy to use, and I had some experience with it too, so I was able to coach them through some of the things for them to install it individually. Each team member was able to install it individually on their own computer, so they had a local access to get screenshots and to look at the software and kind of evaluate it. So that was part of the reason why we went that approach. Also, with the virtual machines, we were able to capture traffic between two machines. So we could set up a Kali box and a server and a client and kind of capture any packets between them and see the raw data going on without having to set up a whole infrastructure with a network and all these things. We were able to simulate all of that locally. So that was great. First thing I'm going to cover here is the open source intelligence straight from the OpenDental website. So this is the manual that they're having you follow for installing the trial version, which becomes the full version once you subscribe and they go through and they set up your database and help you kind of import all of your clients and all that stuff. So that the database credentials and stuff don't necessarily change once you've installed this trial version. So as you can see, this step is optional but highly recommended. So they do recognize that you need to have a password on there, but they don't require it. It's optional. And this is the root user for your MySQL database server, not just the OpenDental database, but for the whole server, for the whole SQL server that's running, the service running on your Windows computer. The root password for it can be blank, and this is not acceptable by any security measures. No matter how secure your network is, you don't want to have a blank password on your database that has all of your customers' PII and PHI installed on it. So next is the A to Z folder is what they call it. This is the share folder where they store, for example, if a dentist takes notes during the session or has a chart, a handwritten chart on paper, and they scan that information in, it gets stored in these folders. Also, when they take pictures of the client's tooth, when they take some doctors will take a picture of the patient's face to kind of have a reference when they're talking to them on the phone. So anything that gets stored, their intake form, so a lot of times that'll have their current health situation, and if they've ever had a heart attack or other things will be documented on that. So obviously that's all very sensitive information that you don't want to have everyone having access to. And their recommendation actually is to give permission to everyone on the security tab, which is a huge security risk. I mean, it's not even saying authenticated users. It's just saying everyone. So that's a huge risk. So, I mean, having this right on their website and this be their recommendation, not wise, really. And I don't really understand why they do this. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It's not hard to put up a requirement for a user. I mean, how many small dental offices, how many employees do you really have? Even if you had shared credentials where you have a operatory user account that everybody logs into, at least assigning that user would at least have some kind of protection on the share folder. So I don't having it open to everyone means that anyone on the network, even from a rogue computer that gets installed on the network, um, anyone can access it. So that's not not the best idea. Um, as I mentioned earlier, we did go through exploit-db.com, to do some recon on what vulnerabilities they might have. We did find some pretty good ones. A local credential disclosure. So basically, that over the network, it shows what your root user account is. So if you recall back on a previous screen, they had you put in your MySQL user and then a password, and you could leave the password blank. Um, and then it also you put in a username, and most people just leave the default root. But if you wanted to try to change it for security, that's a good idea. But then here, this disclosure, it reveals that over the network what the root user is. So even if you didn't choose root, it would show what it is when you do the connection over the network. So that's not encrypted with this version of SQL that they're using, of MySQL. So if you chose their default options, you would see that root is the username, and then you could just try a blank password and it would work. So, and looking at the packet, you'll see that there is no password. So, um, anyway, that was not not a very good design decision from a security standpoint, from Open Dental. I'm not sure why they're still allowing that and why they're using this older version of MySQL and not the latest version. I'm sure there's some kind of technical challenge that they're trying to overcome for that, but that's a pretty major thing that you need to fix. You don't want to have everyone having access to your database. Um, yeah, so there were a couple more for later versions of MySQL, which means like version, I think 5.8 had some vulnerabilities that I saw, and 5.6 as well. So 5.5 would be susceptible to those vulnerabilities too. Um, we didn't go super into detail on that because we found so many glaring ones that it would have gone on for a while. So this is another reason why you don't want to use older versions of software. Um, it's just the longer it's out there, the more vulnerabilities are disclosed and the more things that have been not patched are revealed, that anybody, any script kiddie can access this database and see, oh, it's vulnerable to this. So it's always best to try to stay on top of your versions. So the assessment results. Um, we did find these findings and these results using Kellybox. You could go through and connect it to the different shares and to capture the traffic there. We did use Wireshark on the Windows VM to actually capture things locally as well. But obviously this could be done over the network. And we did that on the server VM, so that way we could see the local connection to the database there locally from the Open Dental software. Um, typically, security practices suggest that you have your client software running on a separate server than your database software. So if one gets compromised, the other one doesn't. In this situation, they run the Open Dental software and the database on the same server, and that's their preferred method of doing it since they do Windows. And that's not really the best idea. Um, as far as the local storage, um, it's using a share, so you can share that out and then set permissions on it. But they also leave the option open where you can just have the data stored locally. And either way, their recommended option of having it available to everyone. They have no permissions, there's no, even if even if you did set permissions on them, the requirements by NIST and several other major standards are that you have data at rest encryption. So that way, if someone steals your server, breaks in and steals your server, or a disgruntled employee takes off with the hard drive, that data is all encrypted and they can't just easily access it. They have to break that encryption first, which can be pretty significant challenge and may not be possible for the average, common criminal. But anybody can take a hard drive out of a computer and stick it into another computer. Well, not anybody, but almost anybody, and load up the data and see all these files if you don't use encryption at rest for data at rest. Um, so that was a major flaw in their design, and not requiring that, and not even I didn't even see a recommendation on their website for encrypting the data at rest, and that's a pretty major issue for any of these major standards that deal with private health information. So the database also is not stored encrypted on the system. So when the system's offline, if someone again were to steal that hardware, um, they would have access to the database. And with local access, you can get around credentials, you can get around passwords without too much of a problem, and you can make a copy of the database and use an offline attack on it. So um, on the OpenNL client software, there was also no username and password requirement to log into the actual client interface. You can save your credentials on there, and just so you don't have to log in, which is a convenient thing for users to be able to just get in the morning and click a couple of buttons and then you're in. But from a security standpoint, it's incredibly vulnerable, and the fact that they allow that, just it speaks volumes to their security mindset, and they're putting security last kind of mentality and putting user convenience first. I don't think most sysadmins would go for that. So we got some of the results here from the Wireshark scan, and you can see here very clearly that the username disclosure that the vulnerability was talking about is right there. The username is plainly visible for the login request. When you try to open up the OpenDental client, it tries to log in as that root user that we selected during the installation. The password is double SHA-1 encrypted, but this can be brute forced with tools like Medusa and Kali Linux. So because it's not like the whole packet's not encrypted with the data in there, this is a pretty big flaw that's fixed in later versions of MySQL, that if they had switched to those, they wouldn't have to deal with as much of this. And it just seemed like a pretty glaring weakness to use an old version. These are the Nmap scan results. We've got some pretty standard Windows ports open. You can see in the first scan, you've got 135, which is the Microsoft Remote Procedure call that allows servers and software to connect to the PC remotely and control certain features on it. The NetBIOS port 139, which is used for identification on the network. And then we've got 445, which is the Microsoft Directory Service port, and that's used for login and credentials and also sharing directory services information on Microsoft. We're going to go down to the bottom one here, and you'll see that this was the actual server that was installed on the second one here with the IP address of 192.168.0.2. You'll see that port 3306 is open, and that's so that the computers on the network can connect to the MySQL database. So, I mean, that's pretty normal, but you do want to use protection on that, but you do have to have that port open. So we did show it as open. I believe that wraps up my portion for this presentation. So again, I'd like to thank my team. I'd like to thank thank Professor for all your patience with dealing with my personal situation. And I hope to work with you guys all again in the future. Thank you so much, and have a great day.